Hello and welcome. Welcome to a brand new series of the IPSA Seminar Series. IPSA is the International Peace College, South Africa, based here in Cape Town, and I'm the principal, Sheikh Ihsan Talib. Over a number of years, we have been conducting seminars, colloquia, on pertinent issues that address and find itself emerging in the Muslim community, as well as in our society at large, both nationally and internationally. The purpose also why we address these issues is because of the importance of reflecting on a middle way perspective examination. The middle way perspective and examination, we believe, is the typical Quranic perception of how we ought to evaluate matters in our lives. Last few days, we've been having wonderful conversations about an important issue known as the phenomenon of ISIS. This is on the basis of the establishment, so-called establishment of a caliphate that had happened in the Muslim world. We had convened a colloquium, and at the colloquium had wonderful presenters of international repute. With us in the studio here today, we have one such scholar, Dr. Jasir Auda, who joined us. Dr. Jasir Auda is an expert in the field of the philosophy of Islamic law and the Maqasid al-Sharia, or more commonly known as the higher purposes of the Islamic law. We say unto Dr. Jasir Auda, welcome Dr. Jasir Auda. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Sheikh Ihsan, Jazakallah khair, and it's a pleasure to be here again in this beautiful country, South Africa, and a beautiful town, Cape Town, and with all the brilliant students and scholars of IPSA. I really enjoyed myself in the past few days.
Thank you very much. Dr. Jasir, to come to the topic of our discussion, we of course find that internationally in the news, in the international media, this is a topic that receives a lot of coverage. Something that I fear sometimes doesn't receive the same amount of coverage is when leading bodies and leading scholars from around the Muslim world present their views and issue statements, contextualizing and placing this phenomenon within a far more authentic and integral position within the corpus of Islamic law. Some of these bodies include the International Union of Muslim Scholars, of which incidentally you're also a member, as well as locally we look at the Muslim Judicial Council here at the Cape, of which I happen to be a member as well. And so we find that statements are issued, really distancing itself of this particular emergence, also condemning the atrocities and barbaric conduct that sometimes seem to become norm within the context of this particular phenomenon. Dr. Jasir, inform us a little bit more about the rationale as to why there seems to be this contrast. The leading religious bodies giving a very clear directive in terms of the Islamic law pertaining to this particular phenomenon, and when it comes to the international media, it seems that this is portrayed as being part of Islam.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, most of the international media are not interested in the truth. They are interested in making a story that brings viewers and brings all of these loud noises that make them sell their stories. In that context, I really appreciate Deen TV for giving us that space to talk about the truth that matters in these issues and how the scholars of Islam are dealing with that issue that claiming to be an Islamic issue. Mentioning the International Union of Muslim Scholars, of which actually both of us are members, Sheikh Ihsan, we issued a strong statement in the name of all the 90,000 scholars who are active members or affiliated with the International Union, saying that these atrocities are not Islamic and the claim of a khilafah is not Shari'i. There are certain conditions in our fiqh that every student of knowledge knows about a khilafah. It has to do with the conduct of the khalifa and with the moral and ethical content of the ruling system of that khilafah before we can call it a khilafah, not any gang of people that makes themselves claim to be a khilafah and just wear these black thobes and whatever, and then they or wave a black flag and this becomes a khilafah. Khilafah has a number of conditions. The International Union of Muslim Scholars judged that these people claiming to have formed a khilafah do not meet these conditions, and therefore they are a false khilafah in that sense. I'm also a member of the European Council of Fatwa, and we issued a similar statement condemning in the strongest terms all of these atrocities, especially the one that happened in Europe, which ISIS calls the lone wolf, whatever, jihad that they had issued, saying that this is unacceptable for peaceful cities in Europe, in Paris and London and in Berlin to see violence that are uncalled for against innocent people. All of that was unacceptable and un-Islamic before it is unacceptable on a human level. So it is also very important to listen to the true voice of Islam rather than the voice that makes a story.
Yes.
And it is very important for our viewers and our brothers and sisters in Islam to know that not anybody who self-claimed to be Muslim, self-claimed to be a Khalifa or to be a representative of something Islamic, not anybody is right in what they are saying and is truthful, and there is a lot of falsehood in the name of Islam.
I think, Dr. Jasser, of course, the responsibility that are borne by these bodies, whether they're international, local in our context here, I think the trend that you will normally find that will find itself weaving itself through all of these institutions and the statements that they make is obviously the more mainstream position of wasatiyya, which is a Quranic concept, also a prophetic tradition in terms of the hadith, a concept which is really founded within our understanding. And so the middle way approach is obviously for us always that mainstream approach, as opposed to these more extreme expressions, obviously, that we sometimes find, as you correctly, I think, indicate, results from a lack of understanding, a lack of knowledge, etc. So if we are talking about a far more sort of mainstream and a sort of middle way approach, which is the Islamic approach, how would we be viewing then, Dr. Jasser, this phenomenon from a more sort of jurisprudential perspective, etc.? Yeah.
Actually, the middle way approach is the original Islamic approach. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. We made you a nation of a middle way or a middle path. This is the straight path that we pray for, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us to in every salah. Guide us to the straight path. The straight path is the middle path. Unfortunately, we have two extremes that we live in today's world, and both find their way, as we were saying, loudly in the media. And the middle way appears to be silent, even though it is not, but perhaps it doesn't make as an exciting of a story. The two extremes are the extreme of literalism that stops at the letter, stops at some forms, historic forms of government, historic forms of society that we had in our history, and especially in our down times of the Islamic history. And we stop at that, we imitate that without looking at the contemporary times and what it means to be Muslim today. And we claim that this is Islamic. And on the other extreme, we have a so-called liberal voice or critical voice that critiques even the fundamental parts of Islam, the faith issues that every Muslim should believe in, the faith articles. A middle path is a path that balances the fixed parts of Islam and the variable parts, balances the divine parts and the human-made parts. The middle path of Islam is a path that is ethical, moral, that puts morality and principles at the top priority and the top consideration when it comes to an Islamic view. So when you form an Islamic view in a middle way, you have to look at issues of justice, issues of wisdom, issues of people's welfare. Imam Ibn al-Qayyim, for example, one of the great scholars of Islam, he said Sharia is all about justice, is all about wisdom, is all about mercy, and is all about good. And therefore, any ruling that takes Sharia from being about justice to being about injustice is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia.
Absolutely.
And any ruling that takes Sharia from being about mercy to being about cruelty is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia.
Yes.
And any ruling that takes Sharia from being about good to being about mischief is a ruling that does not belong to the Sharia.
Right.
So the middle path puts these principles in the top consideration when we try to judge something
Yes.
as Islamic or not. So what we see in the media, on YouTube, and all of these atrocities that are committed in the name of Islam, are they justice? Are they merciful? Are they wise? And are they good? And with a common sense, without even getting into all of these sophisticated juridical rules and fundamentals, we can judge that killing people this way, innocent journalists, innocent people, ethnic cleansing a minority just because they're Christians, peaceful, everything, going about their lives,
Right.
and enslaving people in today's world, and all of that. This is un-Islamic.
Right.
But we need to, as I'm saying, go beyond the form and the labels and the false attires and the false outlook and the words,
Yes.
using all of these Islamic and Arabic words, go beyond that to the essence of what these guys are doing.
Yeah.
Is this Islamic? No, it is not. Therefore, we should not call it Islamic. It is not Islamic. It's not a state to start with, given any definition of a modern state, but it's not Islamic either.
It's not Islamic. I think, Dr. Jasser, in terms of just locating the principles of justice within Islam, it is telling that many a text in the Holy Quran itself really tempers notions of justice with kindness and goodness, notions of justice with a sense of humanity,
Mercy.
and mercy. And so very explicitly in the Holy Quran we find reference to Inna Allah ya'muru bil adl wal ihsan. And so the whole notion of justice, which is adl, of necessity needs to be tempered and always conjoined with al-ihsan, which is of the widest sort of connotations of goodness, kindness, humanity, even in a sense. And so when we see that those values are trampled underfoot, I think then we should be alarmed at why do we find visuals and imagery that want to portray an outward impression or an outward picture on the basis of symbols, on the basis of clothes, on the basis of appearances, that it is Islam, but it's void of the very values, it's void of the very ethics of Islam. And so I think for us, obviously, especially to our young people, as you say, Dr. Jasser, I think many times really the disservice that the international or the more mainstream media does to this middle voice is that it buries really the voice of rationale, it buries the voice of wisdom, and it buries the voice of reason. And so I think it's probably also one of those, as you've mentioned, one of the classical scholars, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi, in his works that relate more particularly to Islamic politics, for example, he very clearly juxtaposes the extremes, of course, that would highlight what is Islamic and what is not Islamic. And so really, as I think you've also mentioned, it's about not elevating the form of something or its shape or its appearance above its essence and its concept. And I think that unfortunately is where many of our own communities sort of fall short, because also as a result of the disservice that we find in the media outlets.
Something important as well for our community here in South Africa, Muslim and non-Muslim, for people of South Africa to know as well. Perhaps many of them are so far from the Arab world, they don't know the details, the intricacies and the complexity in the Arab world.
Correct.
ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, whatever you want to call it, is a symptom rather than a problem in its own right. And when the real problems disappear from the Arab world, Daesh will disappear. It is a symptom of a lot of oppression from regimes that have been ruling this part of the world for decades, sometimes centuries, in a very oppressive style. And then recently, on top of that, occupation from foreign forces and foreign countries that come and open prisons wide for thousands of people, torture them, etc. Problems of oppression, problems of poverty and economic marginalization. We have so many billionaires in the Arab world, but we have so many millions and hundreds of millions in front of them who are poor and hungry. We have hunger problems now in places like Egypt and Libya and Tunisia, and it's amazing. Some of these are oil-rich countries like Libya or Algeria. You find hunger problems, or even Dubai. And what is that? All of these problems caused a lot of youth to be very angry and to feel marginalized and to feel that they want to make the strongest possible statement against their society. And before that, we have a problem in the understanding of Islam. We have a major lack in Islamic thought and major lack in propagating that moderate and mature and modern and contemporary Islamic thought to the youth. Educational systems that are in most part failures, schools that do not do their duty in educating the children in most parts of the Arab world. A failure educational system, many social problems that were left without remedies from the state institutions, civil society that is not allowed to function, accused of treason, accused of whatever, and therefore civil society not even allowed to remedy the state's shortcomings. And all of these problems created these youth, many of them with good intentions, but good intentions do not prevent a person from being a criminal.
Correct.
And therefore we have this mafia in the Arab style that went and created that so-called state, and in the name of that state trying to reform. But I think soon and very early in their experience they are realizing that without proper thought and without the principles of justice and principles of a modern state that they're claiming to be, they wouldn't be able to sustain themselves. They are falling into all sorts of crimes. Many of them are defecting now from the ranks of ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, going back to their countries and narrating how misguided they were. But unfortunately, many other kids, youth, are joining them from Europe, from Asia, from the rest of the world, America, unfortunately, leaving their own societies.
No.
But again, if you look at some of these youth, the three girls from England recently, or the other guys from the US, and you look at their lives themselves were not very balanced lives. They were themselves marginalized in their own countries, UK or Germany or in the Balkans. They themselves did not have rights as communities, and that is part of the problem. So oppression from the Arab regimes, marginalization in European societies, failures in some of the Balkan states, extremism in places like the Philippines or Malaysia, where some of the other kids leave their societies and go and join Daesh. All of this is creating this problem, and without tackling the real issues in Islamic thought and how we approach Islam, we will not be able to solve this problem.
Absolutely. And so young people, obviously, in their desperation, anything that seems to be presenting itself as some indication towards some solution, obviously, to the real life issues, socioeconomic, educational, political issues, obviously, they face on a daily basis, seems perhaps alluring and attractive to follow.
Yeah.
Dr. Jasser, you've obviously touched now on also the areas which we've begun to identify in need for further examinations, which are these geopolitical, of course, elements and complexities that we have playing itself out within the Muslim world. One thing which I also want to reference is it is very telling in one of the publications of a analyst, author, journalist by the name of Graham Fuller. He wrote a book which he titles A World Without Islam. And in his final analysis of this particular work, he basically comes to the conclusion that if we suppose that there was no religion such as Islam existent in the world today, his theory is that there would have been no difference in the relations between, as they exist politically today, between the West and the Middle East. So he says that there are issues that are at play that bring about the kind of foreign policy influences from Western countries towards the Middle East that is really unrelated to Islam. And so I think without us also beginning to delve into those kinds of complexities, again, it should be what becomes part of a middle road response, a middle road examination. Otherwise, we are looking at, perhaps, as you've indicated, many of the symptoms and many of the unintended things that arise, as opposed to also having a keen look at the causes.
I do agree with Graham Fuller's thesis that the Western hegemony in the Middle East is a matter of oil, is a matter of resources, is a matter of strategy to dominate the world. The empire seekers in America, especially from the conservative side, are trying to build a bigger empire. I do agree with this analysis that Islam as Islam is not really a big part or a part of the problem. But I think that Islam as Islam is a major part of the solution.
Yeah.
And without Islam, we would not be able to solve the problems in the Middle East, because Islam is the reference of most people in the Middle East. And without an Islamic approach that is balanced and contemporary, we will not be able to resolve the problems. And Islam is compounding the problem, or rather Islamic thought, wrong Islamic thought, misapplication of Islam, is compounding the problem from our side as Muslims, because so many Muslims in the name of Islam join these deviant groups and so on, and they take different forms, and they cause so much harm in our societies. And so many rulers and tyrants in the name of Islam too, they continue their autocratic ways of ruling us in the Middle East, in the Arab world, and they continue with their totalitarian systems and totalitarian countries, totalitarian systems of government in the name of Islam too, and claiming to be representatives of Islam, and they are not either, because Islam is very democratic, if you wish. The Islamic word would be shura. Islam is based on shura as a public system. The problem is that we have some landmines in the Islamic thought field that we need to clear before we are able to tackle that problem. A lot of what Daesh is relying on is Islamic, but it's wrong. But it's Islamic in the sense of, it is somewhere in our history said that we have to kill people for ridda, apostasy or whatever. And then who is an apostate? Is anybody who goes against their views in any shape or form. And then they come up with this funny qaida or fundamental rule that says قتال المرتد أولى من قتال الكافر, that they're saying we have to fight the apostates before we fight the disbelievers. And the infamous saying of their Khalifa Baghdadi, when he said, if we go to Gaza, we will fight Hamas before we fight Israel, because Hamas are apostates, but Israel are kuffar, and we have to kill the apostates before we kill the kuffar. And so we do have these wrong rules that some people claim to be Islamic, that we need to deal with as scholarly bodies and as institutions like IPSA in our research and in our classroom, and so that we remove this from the Islamic thought, so that we have an Islamic thought that is part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I'm so glad that we are talking about that in terms of IPSA and the new seminar series that we are planning and the new programs that we're planning together.
Dr. Jasser, thank you for those insights. We've come more or less to the end of the program. I think it would be wonderful in our next session to pick up on some of these issues, and particularly, as you've mentioned, the political agendas that many times become conflated and couched into religious values and terms by these very perpetrators of these agendas. And I think those obviously, the final sort of points that I think we would want to conclude on. We don't have more time today for those discussions. But until next time when we do continue with our conversation, thank you very much for joining us, and wonderful to have you with us. Thank you, Dr. Jasser.
Thank you, Sheikh Ahsan.
We say thank you to all our viewers for joining us here on the IPSA seminar series. Until we meet with you again, good evening, good day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.